Hello and welcome to the latest episode of 1 Year On. At this time a year ago, I'd been a fair few days with absolutely no contact with Mr. C, and I was starting to feel like I was regaining control over my life. I hadn't responded to any of his contact, and I can honestly say that I was feeling the benefits in all aspects. I was far from healed, but I just felt like my decision to adopt this grey rock technique and to follow it through properly had released something in me. The emotional roller coaster had slowed down. I wasn't rushing to respond to his messages and feeling like I was an emergency service to his emotional needs. And I'd like to say that Mr. C had accepted this new way of communication, but he hadn't. He was trying every trick in the book he could think of to get me to reply, but I wasn't playing his games anymore. I knew that he got off on my responses and I wasn't going to supply him. In the few days before this day a year ago, he'd sent messages about all sorts of irrelevant information. He'd been recounting the good times that we'd shared together. He sent apologies. He promised things would change. He told me that he had food poisoning and was so sick that I needed to help him. Now, I'm not going to pretend it was easy for me to ignore all of this. That trauma bond was seriously tugging, and I questioned whether I was doing the right thing more times than I care to admit. But I held on to the notion that whilst I couldn't always trust my head, I could trust my body. And the physical symptoms that I experienced when in contact with this man told me just how unhealthy he was for me and how impossible a life of peace and happiness would be with him in my life. Those few days with no contact had truly had an impact on my physical body. I felt less tired. I was able to sit and relax for longer periods of time. I was more focused with my daughter, and I found it easier to follow conversations that were going on around me. But after nearly a week, he got in contact with me and he wanted to discuss one of the topics that was on my green list when it came to my grey rock communication strategy. He wanted to discuss returning my possessions and my dog. It's strange because I'd sort of resigned myself to the idea that if I got my stuff back then fine, and if I didn't, well, that would be fine too. I'd spent so much time and so much energy ruminating around whether he was ever going to let me have any of my things back, and for the most part I wasn't too fussed, but it was the photo albums and the sentimental things that hurt the most. It was like the picture of my daughter's first baby scan where you can't get another copy, or the drawings that she'd done over the years, and he had the ring that my grandpa had wanted me to have on my wedding day, and he had died just 3 months before I got married, and he'd given my grandma instructions to give me what was his mother's engagement ring on my wedding day. The most difficult thing about all of this is that I knew that if I asked for any of these things specifically, there'd be no chance I got them, and so I told myself that if I was meant to get these things back, I would, and if I didn't, there had to be a good reason for it. I was starting to trust in the divine more and more by this point, and it brought me some emotional comfort to release my what ifs back to the universe with faith that whatever happened was the right thing, and this practice has served me well ever since. It's one that I highly recommend to anyone who feels like they have been treated unfairly. It isn't always easy to believe that there's a purpose in our pain, but as most people who have experienced trauma and come out the other side stronger, more confident, and with a deep sense of self-love, self-compassion and self-forgiveness will tell you, releasing outcomes is a pivotal part of the process and one that cannot be skipped over. So, on this day 1 year ago, he sent me a message asking what it was that I would need of my belongings. I wasn't really sure how to handle this request. I didn't know if I should even take it seriously, but I committed to the grey rock technique, so I had to think about how best to respond in a way that minimised the emotion, but also ensured we didn't get into a situation where he was drip feeding me my things in order to maintain contact. And well, let's face it, there is nothing less emotive than a list. I also thought it would be a good option as I could ask for the things that contained my sentimental items rather than for them specifically, because I was so scared he would destroy these things out of spite. Literally nothing would surprise me when it came to this man. So I wrote my list and I made it exhaustive yet vague. I also made sure it was quite long so that he'd get bored of analysing it over a while. It sounds almost calculated, but when it comes to this type of personality, I'm based on everything I was learning about and the trusted advice of my sister, who's a doctor working in psychiatry. I knew I was giving myself the best chance of this working. I'll never understand how someone can behave the way he has, but the fact is he has. And I'd been so naive to so much of it for so long, I no longer needed to apologise for protecting myself and my boundaries, as awkward and new to me as it felt at the time. And so when he asked me what I wanted, I sent him a photograph of the list, and despite all of his replies saying how ridiculous it was to request some of this stuff and that I wouldn't be getting X, Y and Z, I didn't reply. I just waited to see what would happen next. And we'll find out what that is in the next episode. Thank you so much for listening. And if you've got any questions or if you want to connect with me in any way, my inbox is always open. Do remember to like, subscribe and turn on notifications for the post, and I shall see you all soon. Bye bye.